My wife asked if I could build her a new coat rack as she'd run out of space on the one I installed a few years back. I suggested that she get rid of some of the coats that she doesn't wear too often, but we met in the middle. She's getting a new coat rack. To make this coat rack, I only need to use a single piece of wood, and it only needs to be 400mm by 70mm. I could probably dig through my scrap bin to find a piece that size, but it wouldn't make for an overly interesting video. So I'm going to use one of my many pieces of reclaimed spruce here, run it through my surface planer and my thicknesser, through the table saw to get the dimensions I want, and we can go from there. The first thing I'm looking for when I'm selecting a piece of wood is to see just how flat it is straight off the bat. This makes it a lot easier to run through the surface planer and means I have to take less thickness out of the workpiece overall. Question for any other woodworkers working out of a single garage. Do you spend more time moving tools around and setting them up than you do actually using the tools, or is that just me? Let me know down below. What I want to do here is take one of these rough cut boards and clean up all four sides. I'm starting with the surface planer and I'm cleaning up one face and one edge. Once I have the first face and the first edge surfaced, I can then move over to the thickness planer and clean up the second face. So now we've got both faces and one of the edges surfaced. We've also taken it down to about 20mm in thickness, which is right where I wanted it. The next step is to use a table saw to rip this to the final width, which is 70mm, and that will also clean up this final edge. I'm using my workpiece to set the height of the saw blade, as the blade only needs to be high enough to cut through the piece. I'm also using my blade guard. I'll always try to use a blade guard when I'm making through cuts on my table saw. I don't really understand why so many people take these off their saws. Granted, it doesn't make for the best shots when you're filming a YouTube video, but I would rather play it safe and reduce the chance of lopping a finger off. So now we've got the thickness and the width to final dimensions, we need to cut it to final length. What I'm looking at now is the bits that I want to be included in the final piece and the bits I don't like so much. On this side we've got a load of screw holes and this knot that's half chipped out on the edge, which doesn't look very nice. But if I make my cut around here, we can scrap this side and then keep this nicer looking wood for the project. I've used this long strip of melamine to extend the fence on my Mitre saw. It's great if I need to cut multiple pieces to the same length, as I can just measure once, mark it onto the fence extension, set up a stop block, push the piece into it and know that every piece I cut is going to be the same size. In this case I'm only cutting one piece, but I actually find it quicker to do it like this than mark a line and then line that line up with the saw and cut it that way. To keep this coat rack looking like the other one I made, I'm just going to put the 6mm round over on the vertical edges and leave the horizontal edges as they are. Most of the time I'll remember to run a test piece after setting the height of the route a bit. This time I didn't remember and I had it set about 1mm too high, and it's just taken a bit of a bite out of this edge here. I reset it for the rest of this edge, and it's fine there, but yeah, just about 1mm too much here. It's only a small amount and it's for a coat rack, so I'm not that fussed. I can probably just sand it out. Nobody's going to be looking at it in too much detail, so it will be fine. But try to remember to test the height of your route a bit with a scrap piece of wood before you commit to your actual workpiece. The finish I get off my thickness plane is actually pretty nice, so I'm starting sanding at 120 grit. I've started using this 3M Cubitron Xtract 2 paper. It's a bit more expensive than the paper you'd pick up in Wix or B&Q, but it lasts a lot longer and I generally do think it's better value for money. Sanded up to 120 grit. I've finished the edges with some hand sanding. I think this was the side where I dug in a bit too deep with the router bit, but you can't really tell. It was 1mm and it's all been rounded off now, so pretty happy with how that came out. Next step is I'm going to stain this whole thing black, and then I'm going to sand back the black to give it a kind of vintage look and put the final colour over the top. For the black I'm going to be using this Little Fairs black ebony wood dye. I've gone through litres of this stuff. I really like it. You can pick it up on Amazon. I can't remember how much it is, but I'll put a link down below. But yeah, really good stuff. The wood stain's dry now, so I'm going to swap out the sandpaper and use 180 grit. That's going to remove some of the black stain to give me the distressed look I want, and it's also going to smooth over any of those wood fibres that have popped up since I did use a water-based stain. Sanded to 180, it's got the look I want. You can still see some of the black, but it looks like it's worn away naturally. On top of that, we're going with another one of the Little Fairs dyes. This is the golden pine colour. I'm just going to apply it in the same way. While the stain's drying, we can crack open the box to check out the hardware that I'm going to use for the actual hooks. Each of the hooks will be made up from one of these plates, a 90-degree bend, an end cap, and two of these connection pieces. One of the connection pieces I received was a different size to the others, so I cut it down with my angle grinder and just cleaned it up with my oscillating belt sander. Now the wood stain's fully dry and I've got all the fittings assembled for the hooks. I can start laying out where I want the hooks to go on the rack. I'm pretty happy with how this is laid out. It's not millimetre perfect, but again, it's a coat rack, it doesn't need to be. Next job is to mark out where I need to drill the pilot holes for the screws to go in. I've used a bit of blue tape on my drill bit as a depth marker, as I don't want to drill all the way through the piece. In order for this coat rack to match the one I've already built, I wanted the wall fixings to be hidden. To do so, I used my drill press to drill a 10mm hole, roughly about halfway through the coat rack behind the first and the fourth hook. That will allow me to countersink the screw. I also continued the hole through with a 3mm drill bit, just to minimise any chance of the coat rack splitting as I'm attaching it to the wall. Once it's attached to the wall, I can then put the hooks up over the top, hiding those wall fixings. The last step before I install the coat rack is applying the finish. I'm using Danish oil for this project. It's a really easy finish to apply. You simply wipe it on, give it 15 minutes, and then wipe any excess off. I'm only going to apply one coat, as it's not going to see a whole load of wear and tear. If it was a tabletop or something similar, I'd give it a couple more, but one coat should be sufficient for this. Okay, so now I'm just installing the coat rack. I haven't measured how high I want it to be. I've just put it a bit lower than the current one so my wife can easily put her coats on it. And I've just used the spirit level against the existing coat rack to align the new one so it'd be centered on the wall. I'm using these self-drilling metal plasterboard wall fixings. I do always drill a 6mm hole before I insert these into the wall, as I find the results are a little bit better. And I always insert them by hand because I have in the past used a drill and ended up stripping out the plasterboard, making the fixings just spin in place. Each of the hooks is held in place by 3 screws, and I've sprayed these screws black just so they blend in a little bit better. I'm also inserting those by hand just so I don't over tighten and strip out the wood. So there it is, the new coat rack is fully installed, ready for my wife to get even more coats to fill it up. Maybe I need to build a third one at some point. Thanks for watching, I'll catch you in the next one. But yeah, always remember to... But yeah, always try to remember to...